The rain in Blackwood Falls didn't fall, it wept. It had been weeping for 3 days straight, turning the asphalt streets into mirrored rivers and drowning the neon glow of the few surviving businesses. Detective Sergeant Elias Vance hated the rain. It smelled like damp concrete and regret. Vance was a man carved from granite and bad coffee, a 20-year veteran of the Blackwood Falls PD, a town where the average police report involved a stolen lawn gnome or a teenager vandalizing a mailbox. That changed 6 months ago when the disappearances started. Tonight, it was case file 7-14. Sarah Jenkins, 28, vanished from her home on Cedar Street. No forced entry, no struggle, just a half-eaten bowl of cereal on the kitchen counter and a still-warm laptop displaying an archived news article about a local quarry closure. Vance stood in the silent, unnervingly tidy living room, the only light coming from his flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. The air was cold, but not like an open window cold. It was a deeper cold, the kind that settles in your bones and makes you question the physics of temperature. Anything, detective? The voice belonged to Officer Lena Reyes, a sharp, young cop with an MA in criminology who still believed the world operated on logic. Vance slowly swept the beam over a wall of framed family photos. Sarah, smiling, at a beach at a graduation. All normal, all tragically mundane now. No risk. The house is too quiet to clean. A ghost could walk through here without disturbing a speck of dust. He paused, his flashlight halting on a small, dark object tucked beneath the edge of an oriental rug. It wasn't dust. He knelt, pulling out a thin, rectangular card. It felt heavy, cold, and rough like polished volcanic rock. It was made of something that looked like obsidian, hence the immediate weight. On the front, etched with impossibly fine precision, was a single cryptic symbol, a circle split by a vertical line with a short horizontal bar crossing the bottom. It looked like a minimalist keyhole. "What is it?" Reyes asked, stepping closer. Vance turned it over. The back was blank, save for a sequence of numbers subtly etched into the corner. 0714-23:11. "This," Vance said, his voice flat, "is the first piece of physical evidence we've found in 6 months. It's not a calling card. It's a dispatch." He flipped the card back to the front. As his thumb brushed the cold surface, the air pressure in the room seemed to drop. The symbol on the obsidian card, bathed in his flashlight beam, appeared to shimmer, not with reflected light, but with an inner viscous darkness. Suddenly, a sound at IT was a faint, metallic clink from upstairs. Vance met Reyes' eyes. "She had a second-floor office, right?" Reyes nodded, her hand already moving toward her holster. "Locked. We had to use a crowbar to get in." Vance put the obsidian card carefully into an evidence bag, the unsettling feeling of the house doubling with the knowledge that something was upstairs, something that shouldn't be. "Stay here," Vance ordered, but Reyes was already following him toward the stairs. He didn't argue. He knew that cold fear was better handled with a backup. The stairs creaked with an almost theatrical loudness. When they reached the second-floor hallway, the temperature plummeted further. Vance could see his own breath. The door to the office, which they had forced open an hour ago, was now closed. Not fully shut, but slightly ajar, casting a thin black slice of shadow onto the carpet. Vance slowly pushed the door open with his foot. The room was bathed in the harsh, green glow of a monitor that was now mysteriously on. It displayed a simple black command prompt. The air in the room didn't just feel cold, it felt pressurized. On the desk, lying exactly where it hadn't been an hour before, was another obsidian card, identical to the first. But this one was different. As Vance and Reyes stared, a single line of text flashed on the command prompt screen, rendered in jarring, stark white letters. "Access granted, 0714-23:11." A moment of silence, and then the screen cleared. Another line appeared, chilling them to the core. "Dispatch pending, Detective Vance." Subject, Sarah Jenkins. Location, Q Echo 12-inch Q Echo 12, Reyes whispered, her flashlight shaking slightly. "That's the quarry, Elias. The old Blackwood quarry." Before Vance could respond, the computer monitor went dark, plunging the office into absolute shadow. Simultaneously, the second obsidian card, lying on the desk, began to vibrate, emitting a low, resonant hum that seemed to come from inside the earth. The symbol on its surface began to glow a dull, malevolent red. The hollow echo in the house had found its voice. and it was calling them to the darkness. The Blackwood Quarry was a scar on the Earth's surface, an industrial graveyard surrounded by sickly pine trees and a rusted chain-link fence. Once the economic heart of the town, it had been abandoned for 20 years, its main pit, a chasm nicknamed the Devil's Sink. Now a vast black lake of rainwater and chemical runoff, Detective Vance drove the unmarked Crown Victoria through the collapsing main gate, the tires crunching on broken shale. Officer Reyes sat beside him, gripping the glowing, humming obsidian card they'd taken from Sarah Jenkins' office. "It's getting hotter," Reyes murmured, holding the card up. The dull red glow had intensified to a pulsating crimson. The low hum now vibrated through the console. "It feels like it's vibrating on a frequency I shouldn't be hearing." Vance kept his eyes on the road, which quickly degraded into mud and loose rock. The message said, "Dispatch pending." And it named me. I don't like being named Reyes. It means we're not tracking a killer, we're answering an invitation. An invitation to what? The bottom of a hole. They reached the edge of the pit. The torrential rain made visibility poor, but the sheer scale of the sinkhole was terrifying. A vertical drop of over 100 feet to the oily, reflective surface of the water below. "We need to find a path down," Vance stated, grabbing his heavy-duty flashlight and his sidearm. "Wait," Reyes said, pointing. "The card. Look." The Obsidian Dispatch, which had been pulsating erratically, now settled into a steady, directional beam. The intense red light emanating from the etched symbol narrowed into a thin, focused laser that shot out, cutting through the rain and pointing toward a rusted maintenance shack halfway along the quarry's perimeter. "It's a guide," Vance realized, a cold dread replacing his professional skepticism. "It's not just evidence, it's a tool. Let's see where the architect of this little game wants us to go." They parked the car and approached the shack, the mud sucking at their boots. The shack was a derelict box of corrugated iron, its single window smashed decades ago. As they neared, the humming of the card intensified until it was a painful, high-pitched whine. Vance kicked the door open. The interior smelled of old motor oil and decay. The beam from the obsidian card settled on a steel locker against the far wall. "This is too easy, Reyes." "Maybe it wants us to think that," she countered. They forced the rusted lock with a crowbar from the trunk. Inside there was no body, no struggle, and no evidence of Sarah Jenkins. Instead, the locker contained 4 items placed with meticulous care: a stack of vintage high-resolution topographical maps of Blackwood Falls and the surrounding wilderness. A single, perfectly polished white marble sphere, no larger than a tennis ball. A small leather-bound journal. A third obsidian card, identical to the others, but this one completely inert, black and cold. Reyes picked up the journal first. It was heavy and the cover felt warm despite the cold air. She flipped it open to a random page. The writing inside was neat, precise, and written in a mathematical cipher that looked more like geometry than language. "It's not English, Elias. It's symbols, diagrams. Look at this." Vance leaned in. On the page, a complex drawing dominated the center. A series of nested circles and triangles, all orbiting a central symbol that was undeniably the obsidian keyhole. The drawing was labeled with a single handwritten word in English, scrawled beneath the cipher: "The OD Project." But what truly made Vance's blood run cold was the next discovery. Beneath the journal, nestled in the bottom of the locker, was a photograph. It was a faded Polaroid showing a man from the 1980s, dressed in a thick wool sweater and glasses, smiling broadly. He was standing on the edge of the quarry near where they currently were. The man in the photo was Detective Elias Vance, but 20 years younger. The photo didn't just show a younger Vance, it showed him holding something. Something. That was undeniably an obsidian card. Reyes gasped, dropping the warm journal. "Elias, that's impossible. Was that you?" Vance took the photo, his hand trembling. He didn't remember this picture. He didn't remember ever being at the quarry in a wool sweater. Yet, the face staring back was his own, younger, but with the same weary eyes. "The disappearances started 6 months ago, Reyes," Vance said, his voice a strained whisper. "But the journal, the map, this photo, this is decades of work." He looked down at the inert third card in the locker, then back at the glowing one in Reyes' hand. "This isn't an invitation," he concluded slowly. "It's a continuation." Someone didn't just target Sarah Jenkins. Someone is using the disappearances to reopen an investigation I was somehow involved in 20 years ago and completely erased from my memory. As if responding to his realization, the inert card in the locker subtly shifted. A faint, silver light began to leak from the etched symbol, unlike the malevolent red of the active card. The silver light pulsed once, and then the light from the smashed window of the shack momentarily went out. A shadow, large, fleeting, and utterly unnatural, passed directly across the front of the shack, too low to be a cloud, too quiet to be a bird. It was followed by a silence so profound that it seemed to swallow the sound of the rain. Vance snatched the inert card, shoving the unsettling photograph into his jacket pocket. We're done here. Let's get this journal and the maps to the lab. We need to find out who the hell I was 20 years ago. The evidence locker at the Blackwood Falls PD had never housed anything as perplexing as the contents of Locker Q Echo 12. The maps, the marble sphere, the 2 obsidian cards, one pulsating red, one softly glowing silver, and the heavy journal sat under the harsh fluorescent lights of the forensics lab. Detective Vance paced the floor, running a hand through his damp, salt and pepper hair. Officer Reyes sat beside him, reviewing the initial analysis reports. The marble sphere is pure white Italian Carrara, Reyes reported, reading from a tablet. No prints, no residue. Just high-grade marble. The inert obsidian card, the silver one, is composed of an igneous rock, chemically similar to volcanic glass, but the crystalline structure is impossibly dense, and we can't get a fingerprint off either card. They just resist oil and moisture. And the journal? Vance asked, stopping his pacing. That's where it gets interesting. Reyes lowered her voice. I sent high-res scans of the ciphered pages to a linguist at the State University. He says it's a positional, polyalphabetic substitution cipher, but the symbols are not derived from any known language, not Sumerian, not Nordic runes, not even obscure occult scripts. It's what he called a constructed dialect. A constructed dialect designed to write about what? Reyes held up the tablet, showing a digitally enhanced image of one of the journal pages. The linguist managed to translate one term, based on its constant position relative to the mathematical diagrams. Void pressure. Vance felt the cold of the quarry return. Void pressure. A geometric term? More like a physics concept, Elias. The rest of the legible English phrases are just titles on the maps. The nexus point, lateral shift, and then repeated over and over, the 11th hour. Vance walked over to the stack of maps. They weren't standard issue. They were old, brittle, and covered in precisely drawn red circles and complex geometric overlays. The focus of the overlays was always the same: the Blackwood Quarry, Q Echo 12, and the surrounding older parts of town. The 11th hour, Vance muttered, his mind catching on the timestamp from the first obsidian card. 0714-23:11. The military time for 11:11 p.m. Check Sarah Jenkins' records again, Reyes, Vance commanded. Anything she ever searched for, talked about, even remotely connected to this time, geometry or the quarry. Reyes pulled up the files. She was a librarian. History section. Just before she vanished, she spent 3 hours on an obscure digital archive, searching for. Reyes paused, her eyes widening slightly. A man named Dr. Alastair Finch. Vance didn't react with surprise, only grim confirmation. Dr. Finch. I remember the name. He was a local eccentric, a mathematician obsessed with esoteric geometry. He was the only person who disappeared the year that photo was taken, 1989. The department wrote it off as a hiker who got lost in the wilderness. He didn't just disappear, Elias, Reyes said, her voice strained. He was working as a structural consultant for the Blackwood Quarry project. The quarry was shut down a month after his disappearance due to unforeseen structural instabilities. Vance pulled the faded Polaroid from his pocket. Him, 20 years younger, standing on the rim of the Devil's Sink, holding the obsidian card, smiling with Dr. Finch's research site shutting down. I didn't report on his disappearance. I didn't investigate it. I don't remember any of it, Vance said, his voice flat. He was staring at the younger man in the photograph, seeing a stranger who had stolen 2 decades of his life. This is the hook, Reyes, Vance said, gripping the photo tight enough to crease the old paper. The architect of this dispatch isn't targeting missing people. They're targeting my memory. They're using Sarah Jenkins, and maybe 5 others, to force me to look at something I was paid or coerced to bury. Suddenly, the red glowing obsidian card on the table pulsed rapidly, its high-pitched whine escalating into a short, sharp shriek that caused the lab lights to flicker. A third line of text immediately appeared on Reyes' tablet, overwriting the forensics report. Subject, Jenkins. Dispatch confirmed. Location locked. New dispatch pending. Detective Vance. Subject E. Vance. Location, the 11th hour. The line immediately deleted itself, replaced by the blank forensics report. The red card returned to its steady, chilling glow. It knows we're tracking it through the evidence, Reyes whispered, terrified. It's communicating directly with our systems. It's mapping the investigation. Vance walked back to the maps, his eyes scanning the geometric overlays for the phrase, the 11th hour. He found it, a heavily circled point of intersection between 3 different ley lines drawn on the map. It wasn't the quarry. It was a place much closer, much more intimate. The intersection point lay exactly beneath the foundation of the Blackwood Falls Police Department. We don't need to look outside anymore, Reyes, Vance said, his hand dropping to his service pistol holster. Whatever Dr. Finch built, whatever void pressure he was studying, it was never at the quarry. It was just launched from there. He looked at the digital clock on the lab wall. 23:09, 2 minutes until the 23:11 11th hour. Get all uniformed personnel out of the building. Evacuate. Now, tell them it's a gas leak. Anything. I'm going down to the sub-level maintenance tunnels. We're going to face the man I used to be. The basement of the Blackwood Falls Police Department was never meant for human traffic. It was a labyrinth of low-hanging pipes, exposed wiring, and concrete floors slick with decades of condensation. The air was thick with the smell of dust and ozone. Detective Vance, now alone, moved through the gloom, guided by the flickering light of his heavy-duty flashlight and the urgent need to understand his forgotten past. He had placed the gently glowing silver obsidian card in his jacket pocket, feeling its reassuring, non-hostile presence, while the malevolent red one remained locked in the lab. Reyes had executed the evacuation order quickly and efficiently, citing a spurious structural concern. The building was silent, the silence amplifying every drip of water and every nervous shuffle of Vance's boots. The map had pinpointed the intersection, the 11th hour, deep in the sublevels beneath the old evidence storage rooms. To reach it, Vance had to navigate a rarely used access tunnel that he found the entrance concealed behind a stack of broken office furniture. It was a metal grate, bolted shut from the inside, a detail that immediately raised a red flag. He kicked the rusted bolts loose. The tunnel beyond was narrow and suffocating. The geometry was all wrong. The concrete looked newer than the rest of the sublevel, a smooth, unblemished shell that felt unnaturally cold. He reached the end of the tunnel, which opened into a circular chamber, a subterranean room that was utterly out of place. It was about 20 feet in diameter, and the centerpiece was a heavy, cylindrical steel pillar rising from the floor, humming with low-frequency energy. This was the nexus point on Dr. Finch's maps. Vance swept his flashlight beam around the room. He saw the reason for the unnatural cold and the smell of ozone. The walls were lined with banks of vintage humming servers, technology from the late 80s, but they were running, their indicator lights blinking with fierce, organized activity. On a steel table next to the central pillar lay the terrifying culmination of his search. Sarah Jenkins. She wasn't dead, she was suspended by a complex arrangement of thin, silvery wires attached to a crown-like device on her head. Her eyes were open but rolled back, staring blankly at the low ceiling. Her breathing was shallow, mechanical. The wires ran from the device and synthesized into a large, segmented cable that fed directly into a console built into the central steel pillar. Vance lowered his weapon, his heart sinking with profound shock and a wash of desperate relief. She was alive, but clearly being used as a human component. The console beneath the central pillar was where Dr. Finch's cipher met reality. Etched into the control panel were the geometric symbols from the journal. And in the center, perfectly fitted into a custom slot, was the inert, silver obsidian card that Vance was currently carrying. As Vance approached the pillar, the digital clock on the server banks flashed, 23:11. The 11th hour, the steel pillar let out a loud, grinding clunk, and a voice, not human but synthesized and hollow, reverberated through the small room. Access granted. Memory retrieval commence. The silver card in Vance's pocket vibrated violently. A high-pitched, piercing tone erupted from the central pillar, immediately followed by an overwhelming pressure that hit Vance's skull like a physical blow. He stumbled back, clutching his head, a flood of disconnected, terrifying images rushing into his mind. A flash of a younger Elias Vance sitting in this exact room meticulously welding wires, the sound of Dr. Finch's voice, frantic and elated. The geometry holds. We've breached the silence. A vision of the Blackwood quarry but distorted, shimmering, the water blacker than ink, reflecting a sky full of impossibly sharp, angular stars. That a memory of a handshake, Vance's hand shaking hands with a stern, unfamiliar man in a military uniform, sealing an agreement. Vance fell to his knees, gasping. He realized that the pillar wasn't just activating. It was using the void pressure concept, a controlled, localized memory dump, and it was targeting him, using Sarah Jenkins as the receiver or the transmitter. That he forced himself to look at Sarah. Tears were now streaming down her face, mixing with the sweat on her temples. She was crying even though she was unconscious. Then from the darkness behind the steel pillar, a figure emerged. Not Dr. Finch. The figure was tall and impossibly thin, dressed in what looked like a vintage olive-green military field uniform, clean and pressed despite the environment. His face was gaunt, his eyes wide and milky white, staring straight at Vance with unsettling clarity. The man smiled, revealing teeth that were too long and too sharp for a human. He was holding the red glowing obsidian card, which Vance had believed to be safe in the lab. Detective Vance, the figure hissed, his voice dry like rust grating on stone. You always find your way back to your failures. 23:11, the hour of my birth and your retirement. Vance scrambled back, raising his weapon. Who are you? Where did you come from? The figure stepped into the light, pointing the red card at the central pillar. The metal hum intensified to a deafening roar. I am the project manager, the figure stated, the synthesized voice from the pillar suddenly changing, overlapping with his own wet human voice. And you, Elias, buried the foundation of this city. You condemned Blackwood Falls to void pressure for a paycheck. He looked at Sarah Jenkins. The girl? She was necessary to reboot your old work. Now that your memory is returning, the real work can begin. The figure snapped his fingers. On the console next to Sarah Jenkins, a final line of text appeared, written in the shimmering dark font of the first dispatch. Project status. Synthesis complete. Initiate lateral shift. The central pillar began to rotate, slowly at first, then gaining speed. The sound wasn't of metal grinding, but of space itself tearing. The air in the chamber turned icy, and the shadows on the walls began to warp, stretching into impossibly sharp angles. Vance knew the term, lateral shift. It was on Dr. Finch's maps. It meant the opening of a door, a gateway to the source of the void pressure. The central pillar spun faster, shrieking like 1,000 dying souls. The geometric symbols etched into the floor around it began to glow with the same malevolent red as the project manager's obsidian card. The lateral shift was tearing the chamber's reality at the seams. Vance fired 3 quick rounds at the project manager's chest. The man didn't flinch. The bullets hit with the dull thud of metal on dense granite and immediately dropped to the floor, flattened into useless discs. A simple ballistic solution, detective? The project manager sneered, his white eyes tracking the fall of the bullets. You forget. I am standing in the nexus point. The geometry here repels your mundane physics. He held up the red card. This is the dispatch key. key. I controlled the shift. The walls of the chamber began to ripple. Where there should have been solid concrete, Vance saw flashes of a terrifying non-Euclidean landscape. Impossible angles, light that bent unnaturally, and the chilling, utter blackness of the void Dr. Finch had written about. Vance realized he couldn't fight this man conventionally. He had to stop the machine that he scrambled toward the pillar, diving past the project manager and aiming his flashlight at the console where Sarah Jenkins' harness connected. He saw the silver obsidian card, the key to the system, locked in its slot. The silver card is the safety mechanism. Vance yelled, recalling the scattered memories. Finch built in a lock. A lock you designed, Elias. The project manager chuckled, the sound dry and hacking. A pointless sentimentality. It only delays the inevitable. The project manager moved with unnatural speed, intercepting Vance and backhanding him with terrifying force. Vance slammed against the server racks, the old metal protesting with a shower of sparks and a puff of acrid smoke. Vance tasted blood. But the pain was secondary to the rising sense of dread. He looked up. The project manager was slowly walking toward Sarah Jenkins, his hand reaching out to the head harness. "We need to increase the synchronization rate, Sarah," the project manager whispered, his voice suddenly kind and chillingly familiar. "The detective needs to remember all of it. Every betrayal. If the synchronization increased, it would flood Vance's mind with the full, traumatic memory, and likely kill Sarah Jenkins in the process." Vance knew what he had to do. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the inert, silver obsidian card. He had already put the active red card in the lab. Wait. The project manager had the red card. That a new, terrifying realization struck Vance. The project manager hadn't broken into the lab. The project manager was the other half of the 0714-23:11 dispatch. He had been summoned to the nexus point, just like Vance. The silver card in Vance's hand suddenly began to glow intensely, radiating warmth and a soft, protective white light that fought against the geometric warping of the room. "You took the wrong key, old man," the project manager said, his voice laced with venom. "That card only contains the memory of your loyalty to the project. It's the 0714-23:11 address key. It opens the door, but it doesn't control the shift." Vance ignored him. He was operating purely on instinct and the sudden, overwhelming memory of Dr. Finch, shaking his hand, slipping him the silver card and whispering, "If the nexus is activated, use this. It closes the geometry, Elias. It's the override." With a final surge of adrenaline, Vance lunged, not for the project manager but for Sarah Jenkins. He didn't have time to unlock the silver card from the control panel. He had to break the circuit that he grabbed the thick, multi-segmented cable feeding into the console and, with a desperate roar, ripped it free. The effect was instantaneous and violent. The entire chamber exploded with kinetic energy. The central pillar stopped spinning with a sickening, metallic shriek. The malevolent red symbols on the floor died instantly. The warping shadows snapped back to the mundane reality of old, damp concrete. But the backlash was devastating. Vance was thrown backward as the massive cable, now live and sparking wildly, whipped across the room. He slammed into the wall, the impact knocking the air from his lungs. The project manager, however, was in the center of the backlash. He screamed, a high, unnatural sound that broke the silence of the police station. The momentum of the stopped shift recoiled through him. He seized up, his limbs locking into sharp, geometric angles. The red obsidian card flew from his grasp and skittered across the concrete floor. As the project manager collapsed, the final, agonizing piece of memory slammed into Vance's head, clearer and colder than everything else. 1989. The military man wasn't just sealing an agreement. He was paying Vance to stage Dr. Finch's disappearance and install the nexus point, to build a weapon that could open a door to the void. The project manager was Dr. Finch's son, Adam, who had witnessed the betrayal and been driven mad by the geometry his father had opened. The project manager, Adam Finch, was now a convulsing heap on the floor. Vance dragged himself over to Sarah Jenkins. She was unconscious, but her breathing was deep and even. He tore the crown from her head, disconnecting the last of the sinister wires. That he looked at the convulsing figure of Adam Finch. Finch's eyes were still open, staring past Vance at the ceiling. "You can't close it, Elias," Finch gasped, blood leaking from his nose and ears. You only shut the door. The shift is still active. It's inside the geometry. Look at your hand. Look at the key. Vance glanced down at his hand, still clutching the silver obsidian card. The card was now throbbing, not with light, but with a deep, internal rhythm that he slowly turned his head toward the central pillar, which was still humming softly. A small, almost invisible crack had appeared at the base of the steel cylinder. And from that crack, a faint, metallic clink sounded. Not the sound of dripping water, but the sound of something tapping on the stone floor. A fourth obsidian card, completely black, inert, and stamped with the geometry of the void, slowly slid out of the crack and rested on the floor. The shift had been halted, but the void had already sent its next dispatch. A minute later, the metal grate at the tunnel entrance slammed open, and Officer Reyes burst into the circular chamber, her weapon raised. She took in the scene, the sparking wires, the convulsing figure of Adam Finch, the project manager, the unconscious Sarah Jenkins, and Detective Vance, bloody and leaning against the wall. "Elias, what the hell happened?" "I heard a shriek," Reyes shouted, her voice echoing in the confined space. "It was a trap," Vance managed, pushing himself upright. He pointed to Adam Finch. "That's Adam Finch, Dr. Finch's son. He was running a geometry weapon designed to open a portal to something outside of reality. The victims, they were used to power it to retrieve my forgotten memories." Reyes lowered her gun slightly, her gaze fixed on the unnatural sight of the contorted Finch. "His body, it looks wrong. He shut down the circuit," Vance explained, gesturing to the ripped cable. "He saved the girl, but the backlash hit Finch." Vance moved quickly, grabbing the silver obsidian card he had used to short the system, and picking up the malignant red one that had fallen from Adam Finch's hand. He then noticed the new fourth card, the one that had slid from the crack in the pillar. It was pure black, inert, and felt intensely cold to the touch. He dropped it into an evidence bag, his mind racing. "The project is still active, Reyes," Vance warned. Adam Finch said, "I only shut the door. This whole building is sitting on a geometrical nexus point. We need to secure the girl and get out." They worked quickly, Reyes radioing for a medical unit and Vance covering her as they loaded Sarah Jenkins onto a stretcher Reyes had brought. As they did so, Adam Finch's body went completely rigid. His eyes, still staring blankly, rotated toward the large, humming server banks. "It's evolving," Finch rasped, his voice barely a breath. "The geometry seeks stability, and the stability is—" He coughed, a sound like dry paper crumpling, in the structure. He died with that warning. They carried Sarah Jenkins out of the sublevel and through the deserted police station. Reyes had successfully cleared the building, but the silence now felt less like an evacuation and more like an ambush. Vance paused in the main bullpen, noticing that the ordinary, familiar space was subtly wrong. The shadow cast by his own desk lamp was sharper, blacker than it should be. The corner of the room seemed to be bending in on itself, a minuscule distortion in the drywall that looked like a perfectly straight line drawn by a ruler, where no line should be. "Did you notice the air outside?" Reyes asked, securing Jenkins on the ambulance gurney that had just arrived. "The rain stopped completely. There's not a single sound." Vance looked up. She was right. The weeping rain of Blackwood Falls had ceased. The only light was the unnatural, harsh glow of the streetlights illuminating a completely still world. "The lateral shift didn't stop, Reyes," Vance whispered, feeling the truth sink in like ice water. "It just stabilized itself inside the nearest geometry, our police station. This building isn't just sitting on the nexus, it is the nexus now." As the ambulance doors closed on Sarah Jenkins, Vance turned back to the police station entrance. The front doors, which had been securely locked, now stood slightly ajar. "I need to go back in," Vance said, his hand automatically reaching for the silver obsidian card in his pocket. "I need to find out what Finch meant by the structure, and what this new inert card is for." Reyes stepped toward him. "Absolutely not. We call the state police, the FBI, anyone. This is beyond Blackwood Falls PD." "No," Vance countered, his eyes hard. "They'll think it's a gas leak gone bad, a drug lab explosion." And the moment they disturb the geometry, the moment they start taking apart the structure, the shift will restart. This is my responsibility. I built this mesh 20 years ago. He pushed past her, heading back toward the front doors that as he re-entered the deserted bullpen, the lights above flickered, not with a simple electrical shortage but with a chaotic, non-rhythmic pulse. The computer monitors, all supposedly powered down, suddenly flared to life. But they weren't displaying the department login screen. They were displaying the cipher from Dr. Finch's journal, the impossible geometry, the nested circles and triangles, all pulsating red. Vance stopped dead, his flashlight beam sweeping across the room. Then he saw it. Hanging from the ceiling directly over the spot where his desk should be, a perfectly rendered model of the entire Blackwood Falls police station, scaled down to a foot-square miniature, was slowly rotating. It was made of the same unnaturally dense, dark material as the obsidian cards, and its miniature windows were glowing red. As Vance stared, one of the tiny doors on the miniature station model swung open with a microscopic clink. From the darkness of the open door, a sliver of light, a perfect, razor-thin line, emerged, followed by the appearance of a fifth obsidian card, sliding out and dropping to the floor of the miniature model. The geometry was not just stable. It was active, and it was using the physical structure of the police station as its new source of dispatches. Detective Vance stood frozen in the bullpen, staring up at the miniature, obsidian model of the police station. The model wasn't a decoration, it was the active control panel for the stabilized shift, communicating in the most unsettling way possible. The fifth card, barely visible on the floor of the miniature model, solidified the truth. The dispatches were not targeting people, but Vance's knowledge that he forced himself to move, the silver obsidian card clutched in his left hand. He headed toward the chief's office, the only place with old archived blueprints of the building's infrastructure that as he moved, the geometry of the room seemed to push back. The long hallway leading to the office now felt longer, the walls seemingly bowing outward then inward. Vance passed a water cooler. Its clear plastic bottle was now filled with something that looked like thick, shimmering quicksilver, its surface trembling. He reached the chief's office and found the original blueprints rolled up in a dusty metal tube. He spread the large paper out on the chief's massive mahogany desk. The blueprints confirmed his terrifying suspicion. The structural foundation of the Blackwood Falls PD was intentionally built around the nexus point. Dr. Finch, or whoever paid him, had incorporated his geometry into the very bones of the building. Vance traced the lines on the map, his mind now clearer, the memories from the sublevel synthesizing into terrifying understanding. He looked at the 4 obsidian cards he now possessed. Red, active / control, the dispatch key held by Adam Finch. Control over the shift. Silver, override / loyalty, the safety mechanism, given to him by Dr. Finch. Used to short the system. Black, inert / locator found under the pillar. Unknown function. Fifth card, miniature just appeared on the model. Unknown function. He paused at the entry in the blueprints detailing the main support column near the sublevel access tunnel. A note, written in faded, familiar handwriting, his own 20 years ago, was scribbled in the margin. Must maintain the 10 degrees lean. Stability is in the imperfection. The imperfection. The 10-degree lean was a deliberate flaw in the geometry, a critical error he had allowed. Vance realized that the geometry wasn't meant to be perfectly straight. It was meant to be unstable so that the energy could escape into the void. By breaking the circuit, he hadn't closed the portal. He had forced the energy of the shift into the unstable structure of the police station itself. Suddenly, the desktop monitor in the chief's office flickered. The same message that had appeared on Reyes' tablet now burned into the screen. Dispatch 005 pending. Location, the imperfection. Subject, Lena Reyes. Vance felt a crushing wave of panic. Reyes was still outside, securing Sarah Jenkins. But the location, the imperfection, meant the shift was now targeting the structural weakness, the 10-degree lean. He grabbed his flashlight and raced back toward the bullpen. As he passed the main records room, he heard a sound, a soft, wet thump from inside the locked room. Vance kicked the door open. The room was filled with rows of metal filing cabinets. But now, one of the columns of cabinets was angled unnaturally, leaning at exactly 10 degrees relative to the floor. The metal was warped and groaning under the internal pressure, and pinned against the side of the leaning cabinet, held there not by gravity but by an unseen force, was the missing fourth card, the one he had bagged from beneath the central pillar. The black, inert card that he approached cautiously. The black card was vibrating violently. On the wall behind the cabinet the plaster had cracked, but the crack wasn't random. It was a perfect, razor-thin line that followed the precise geometry of a massive, inverted triangle that he reached out and snatched the black card. It felt impossibly heavy, like a piece of frozen time that as his hand closed around it, the walls around him dissolved. Vance wasn't in the records room anymore. He was standing on a flat, boundless black plain. Above him, the sky was a swirling vortex of impossible color, dominated by a single massive rotating geometric shape, a colossal angular construct of pure, shimmering obsidian. This was the source of the void pressure that he was in the shift. Then he heard a voice, not Adam Finch's, but the synthetic, hollow voice of the Nexus machine, echoing from the void itself. The black key. The anti-geometry. You cannot escape the structure, detective. You are the flaw. The imperfection. Vance squeezed his eyes shut. This is not real. This is only a memory retrieval. The shift is using my eyes. That he opened his eyes. He was back in the records room, panting. The filing cabinets were still leaning, the cracks still visible, but the black plane was gone. The shock was the warning. The black card, the anti-geometry key, had given him a direct, brief window into the void that he looked down at the fifth card in his other hand, the one that had fallen from the miniature model. It was tiny, almost a shard, and etched on it was a simple diagram, a floor plan of the Blackwood Falls PD with one section, the roof antenna, circled in red. Suddenly his radio crackled to life. Ray's voice, tight with panic. Elias. Get out. The roof antenna. The signal broke up, replaced by a sound like tearing fabric. Vance looked at the diagram on the fifth card. The roof antenna. The highest point. The logical spot for the final, catastrophic lateral shift. The point of highest instability. He now understood the geometry. The black key, anti-geometry, and the silver key, safety, were his only tools. He had to reach the roof antenna, the final, exposed point of the geometry, before the shift consumed Reyes and the town. Vance sprinted toward the stairs, the cold weight of the black anti-geometry key in one hand and the warm glow of the silver safety key in the other. He knew he had minutes, maybe seconds, before the imperfection at the roof antenna initiated the full, devastating lateral shift. As he ascended the stairwell, the instability became overwhelming. The geometry of the building was actively fighting him. Each landing was warped. The stairs were steeper or shallower than they should have been. On the third floor, a massive section of the concrete wall shimmered and turned transparent, briefly revealing the impossibly distant, cyclopean structures of the void outside. Vance didn't stop, focusing only on the rhythm of his feet. He burst onto the roof access door, kicking it open. The roof was a flat, gravel expanse, dominated by the massive, 60-foot steel antenna tower. The air up here was electric, buzzing with kinetic energy. The silence that had fallen over Blackwood Falls was broken only by the high, singing whine of the antenna's guide wires. Officer Reyes was there. She was not injured, but she was trapped. She was standing pressed against the concrete lip of the roof, her eyes wide with terror. The massive steel antenna was twisting. It wasn't bending in the wind. The metal was rotating on its vertical axis, shimmering with an unnerving internal light that pulsed red and black. Her legs were pinned by a section of steel railing that had been pulled inward by the twisting geometry, trapping her ankle securely. Elias, look, she cried, pointing to the base of the antenna. A cluster of wires, thicker and darker than any communications cable, was emerging from the concrete base. They were coiling around the steel structure, and at the junction where they met the main antenna shaft, a sixth, large obsidian card, shaped like a thick, triangular wedge, was slowly being forced into a custom-welded slot. That's the final piece. Vance shouted over the rising metallic whine. The wedge key. When that's seated, the shift goes critical. The silver and black keys in Vance's hands were vibrating in opposition, the silver pulsing with heat, the black radiating an unnatural cold. Is targeting me, Elias. Get out of here. Reyes screamed, struggling against the railing. Vance ignored her. He knew he had to stop the wedge key from seating itself. He sprinted across the gravel toward the antenna base, ignoring the feeling that the ground beneath him was tilting. That he reached the base just as the triangular wedge key was 3/4 of the way into its slot. The entire antenna structure shuddered, emitting a burst of intense, blinding red light. Vance thrust his silver key, the safety override, at the slot, aiming to short-circuit the connection. But the wedge key was guarded. As his hand neared the slot, the wires around the antenna base snapped into life, forming a dense, woven field of shimmering dark energy, a cage of pure geometry that repelled his touch. The synthetic, hollow voice echoed again, not from the radio but from the vibrating antenna itself. The structure protects its final synthesis, detective. You closed the door downstairs. This is the new lock. Vance drew back, scorched by the static energy. He looked at the silver key, then at the black key. The silver was the override. It fought the geometry. The black was the anti-geometry. It showed him the void. That he had a horrifying thought. What if the only way to break this new lock wasn't to fight the geometry, but to introduce a new, equal level of instability? He looked at Reyes, still pinned, now crying out in pain as the railing tightened around her ankle. Reyes, trust me. Vance shouted. That he held up the black anti-geometry key. He focused on the fleeting glimpse of the void he had seen in the records room, the knowledge that this card could tear the fabric of reality. That he plunged the black key not into the antenna slot, but into the thick, supporting steel column next to it, right where the base entered the concrete. The result was cataclysmic. Instead of shorting the geometry, the anti-geometry key initiated a countershift. The column where he placed the black card didn't just bend. It instantly turned into a flowing liquid geometry, a vertical river of pure, shimmering darkness, pulled straight from the void. The energy shield protecting the wedge key immediately collapsed as the structure itself liquefied. Vance had mere seconds. He pulled the silver safety key and plunged it into the wedge key's slot. That a violent, blinding flash of pure white light. The sound of the geometry tearing itself apart was immense. The black, liquid geometry immediately solidified. The twisting antenna snapped back to its original position. The wedge key, along with the silver card, was violently ejected from the slot, tumbling over the edge of the building. Silence returned, absolute and total. The air was thick with the smell of ozone and burnt concrete. Vance staggered back, shaking uncontrollably. The antenna was still. The energy was gone. Lena. Reyes, pale and gasping, was still trapped, but the railing had loosened. Vance rushed to her side, pulling the twisted metal away and helping her to her feet. You opened it, Elias, Reyes stammered, pointing a trembling finger at the antenna base. Vance looked. The black anti-geometry key was embedded securely in the steel column, now inert, sealing the wound he had created. But where the wedge key had been, there was now a deep, triangular recess in the concrete. And from that recess, a small laminated paper had fluttered out. It wasn't obsidian but mundane paper stained with age. Vance picked it up. It was a single-page military authorization document, dated 1989. The headline was stark, OD Project Termination Order. The document authorized the use of localized instability geometry to achieve asset retrieval. The signatures were illegible, but the name of the primary asset was crystal clear, Dr. Alastair Finch. And below that, the name of the officer authorizing the structural instability, Detective SGT. Elias Vance. Vance read the final, chilling line. The geometry must be sealed with the blood of the orchestrator to prevent iterative breach. Vance looked at the black key embedded in the steel column, now sealed with the blood from his own hand where the key had torn his skin upon entry. He had not just closed the geometry, he had sealed it with the final, required element. But the finality felt hollow. The system was closed, but the void had been exposed. The aftermath was a desperate, surgical attempt at damage control. Reyes, her ankle bandaged, stood watch while Vance contacted the only person he could trust outside of Blackwood Falls, a retired FBI contact, Agent Hollis, who specialized in unexplained structural incidents. Vance didn't tell him everything, just enough about the localized instability to warrant an immediate, silent cover-up. Within 2 hours, a nondescript black van arrived. A team of engineers and specialized cleanup crew, all operating under strict non-disclosure, began to dismantle the nexus in the sublevel and stabilize the police station's foundation. They removed the dead body of Adam Finch, treating it as an anonymous fatality of the structural collapse. Vance sat in the back of his car with Reyes, watching the slow, meticulous destruction of the machine he had helped build and bury. Sarah Jenkins was safe, recovering in a hospital miles away, with a severe case of exhaustion and no memory of the previous 2 weeks. "We lost the silver key and the wedge key," Reyes noted, her voice flat. "They flew over the edge of the building." "They're gone, Reyes," Vance confirmed, looking at the 2 remaining cards he had bagged. The inert black anti-geometry key, still subtly smeared with his blood from the column, and the tiny 5th card, the miniature blueprint. "The geometry is unstable but sealed. No one talks about what happened tonight. No one talks about Finch, the keys, or the void." "What about that document?" she asked, referring to the military termination order. Vance pulled the faded paper from his pocket. "It confirms it. Dr. Finch wasn't a missing hiker. He was a military contractor developing a weaponized geometry to achieve asset retrieval, which I think meant pulling something out of the void. And I, the young, ambitious sergeant, signed off on the cleanup and the structural cover-up for the sake of the project's secrecy." He looked at the signature of his younger self. The betrayal tasted like ash. And Adam Finch. He was trying to get revenge and finish his father's work simultaneously. He used the missing people to activate the nexus, forcing the system to retrieve the one piece of information it needed to complete the shift. "My memory?" A chilling thought struck Reyes. If he used the missing people to power the retrieval, and the geometry is sealed, what happened to the people who were still missing? The 5 before Sarah Jenkins. Vance stared at the silent, dark structure of the police station. He had saved the last victim, but the others? The geometry required 6 victims to reach full operational capacity, Vance said, his voice barely audible. "They weren't just retrieved, they were consumed. They are the fuel that the geometry needed to stabilize the localized shift." The truth was a cold, brutal weight. Vance hadn't been fighting a serial killer. He had been fighting a physics experiment that used human beings as batteries to correct an algebraic error. Reyes shuddered. "Then we need to find those cards that flew off the roof." "No," Vance stated firmly, putting the 2 remaining cards into a specialized, lead-lined evidence box. "We are leaving them alone." That military document mentioned an iterative breach. Vance tapped the black key's label, anti-geometry. "The void doesn't care about a sealed door, Reyes. It cares about stability. The black key I used didn't close the portal. It simply corrected the structure's flaw using the opposite geometry, creating a temporary equilibrium. The void will now try to reintroduce the instability, but it will do so in a different, iterated way. It will adapt." He picked up the tiny 5th card, the miniature floor plan with the roof antenna circled. "This tiny card is the last true dispatch. It's the coordinates of the flaw. And the void is now looking for a new flaw to exploit." Suddenly, the police radio, which had been silent for hours, crackled that IT was the voice of the FBI agent Hollis from the black van. His voice was unusually calm, almost monotone. "Detective Vance. Is Hollis. We're done with the sub-level. Everything is sealed. But we found something under the primary support beam. A dispatch. It's addressed to you." Vance and Reyes exchanged a look of pure dread. Hollis continued, his voice devoid of emotion. "It's a miniature rectangular card. Made of obsidian. And it contains a new sequence. 007. Hollis paused and then delivered the final, terrifying line. "The card is etched with a single, unique symbol. It's the floor plan of the entire Blackwood Falls PD, but this time the geometry is perfect. And the only circled part is the one we just stabilized, the sub-level." The iterative breach had begun. The void had studied the flaw, corrected its structure, and was now challenging Vance with the geometry he had just fixed. The horror wasn't over. It had just learned to be more precise. The black van pulled away, taking the grim remnants of the nexus point with it. Agent Hollis handed Vance the 7th obsidian card, the dispatch 007. It was perfectly rectangular, jet black, and unnervingly smooth. It showed the entire floor plan of the Blackwood Falls PD, drawn with flawless, impossible accuracy. The sublevel, the area they had just violently repaired and sealed, was circled with a razor-thin, cold silver line. "The geometry is perfect," Reyes whispered, looking over Vance's shoulder. "It's what Finch was trying to achieve before he disappeared. The perfect, stable nexus." "No," Vance corrected, gripping the card. "The perfection is the new flaw. The Void knows we fight instability. It's now using perfect stability as the new trigger for a shift. It's challenging us with its own corrected homework." The two remaining police officers re-entered the station. It was unnervingly pristine. The flickering lights were steady. The warped walls were straight. The smell of ozone was gone, replaced by the sterile, cold scent of fresh concrete, the work of the cleanup crew. The perfection was terrifying. They walked down the main hallway. Vance noted the difference. The shadows, once harsh and black, were now muted and geometrically correct. The air conditioning hummed at a flawless, constant pitch. The silence was absolute. "We need to find out what this perfect geometry is hiding," Vance stated, heading toward the chief's office. "The sublevel is sealed, but that card means the activity is happening there or starting there." Reyes followed, her hand resting near her weapon. "We have no tools, Elias. The anti-geometry key is locked up. The silver key is gone." "We have the fifth card," Vance reminded her, holding up the tiny fragment he'd pulled from the miniature model. "The one that circled the antenna. It means the system still thinks we are the source of the flaw." They reached the chief's office. Everything was exactly as they had left it. The desk, the old blueprints, the faint lingering scent of bad coffee. But on the center of the mahogany desk, where Vance had previously spread the blueprints, was a fresh puddle of clear, odorless liquid. Vance touched it. It was ice cold, but it didn't evaporate. In the center of the puddle, a new message had formed, written in the shimmering quicksilver liquid from the water cooler he'd seen earlier. "Access granted, Detective Vance. Iterative Dispatch 007 commence. Target, the seventh flaw." "The seventh flaw," Reyes breathed. "The perfection has 6 elements. We are the seventh. The flaw." Vance's gaze fell on the old, dusty mirror hanging on the wall of the chief's office. It had been there for 30 years, a heavy, Baroque piece that often cast distorted reflections due to its age. But now the reflection was flawless. Too flawless that he saw the desk, the room, and Reyes standing behind him, all rendered with crystalline, perfect clarity. But he didn't see himself. That he stared at the spot where his reflection should be. The mirror showed the desk, the wall behind him, and the entire room through his own figure, as though he were entirely transparent. Reyes gasped, staring at the mirror. "Elias, you're not there." "The void pressure," Vance whispered, feeling the coldness of the seventh dispatch card in his hand. "It didn't just target my memory, it targeted my physical presence in its perfect geometry. In this state of stability, I am the only anomaly. I am the seventh flaw." He turned away from the terrifying sight. "The sublevel is the trigger. We need to find the access point before I become fully irrelevant." They rushed back to the stairs leading to the sublevel access tunnel. The metal grate he had kicked open earlier was now perfectly resealed. The bolts were shiny and brand new, as if they had never been touched. Vance found a thin seam on the doorframe, a hairline fracture barely visible. He pressed the cold, black Dispatch 007 card against the seam. The card immediately heated up, glowing a vibrant, furious silver. The sound of high-pressure air escaping echoed as the card seemed to physically melt into the metal seam, dissolving a perfect, rectangular hole in the door, just large enough for the card itself. Vance pulled the card out. The clean, rectangular hole remained. The card was now inert again. He pushed the door open. The tunnel beyond was perfectly straight, the lighting even, the air still. The circular chamber was now sealed with a massive, featureless steel vault door, the kind seen in secure banks, with no hinges, no handle, and no mechanism. It was simply a flawless circle of cold steel. "The perfection is the lock," Reyes said, her voice shaking. "How do we open a door with no handle?" Vance felt the chill of the seventh flaw deepening in his bones. He knew the answer, a terrifying certainty born from the trauma of the last few hours. That he looked at the tiny fifth card in his hand, the last true dispatch, the miniature blueprint, the coordinates of the flaw. The flaw is me, Reyes, Vance said, taking out his sidearm. And the geometry requires a sacrifice for a breach. He placed the fifth card on the vault door. He knew the tiny card would absorb any kinetic energy. Vance aimed his weapon not at the door, but at the empty space where his reflection should be. If I am the flaw, then the removal of the flaw is the key to the next stage, he said, staring at the perfect silver circle on the vault door. If I shoot myself, the system achieves perfect, complete stability, and the lateral shift initiates, consuming the city. He lowered the gun. There had to be another way. He looked at the fifth card on the door. He pressed his bloody hand, the hand that had sealed the roof geometry, against it. Access denied. Flaw detected. Vance turned to Reyes, the realization dawning in his eyes, more terrifying than any monster. The perfect geometry doesn't want my death, Reyes. It wants my betrayal. It wants the flaw to be absolute and complete. It wants me to break the structure not by force, but by a final fatal action that reveals the true internal corruption of the Nexus. He looked at Reyes, his only ally, his only witness. He had to break the structure of their trust, not the steel of the vault. Vance stood before the silent, flawless vault door, the small fifth card pressed against the cold steel by his bloody palm. The air in the sublevel tunnel was too cold, too still, anticipating the final move. What are you talking about, Elias? Betrayal? Reyes' voice was sharp, laced with confusion and rising fear. We're the only ones here. There's no one left to betray. The geometry requires a perfect solution, Vance explained, his eyes fixed on the fifth card. Adam Finch's Nexus was powered by 6 victims and sealed by my blood, a physical betrayal of Dr. Finch's trust. The iterative breach, the perfect geometry, now demands a structural betrayal, a rupture in the final, perfect structure it can perceive. He looked at Reyes. You are the structure, Lena. You are the stability I've relied on. The perfection of the geometry is designed to isolate the flaw, me, and force me to destroy my only remaining support. I have to break the structure of the team. Reyes took a step back, confusion hardening into defiance. You're talking nonsense. The stress is getting to you. We can call for backup. We can. No, we can't. Vance roared, the sound echoing harshly in the confined space. Every moment we delay, the void pressure increases. I felt it, Reyes. I'm fading. I'm becoming the flaw it wants me to be. I need you to do something impossible. Vance pulled the lead-lined evidence box from his jacket, the box containing the inert, dark black anti-geometry key, the one he'd sealed in the antenna, and the red dispatch key, the one Adam Finch had used to control the shift, now inert. That he handed the red dispatch key to Reyes. It was cold and utterly dead. This key controlled the chaos. The anti-geometry key fixed it. This red key needs to be destroyed by the one thing the geometry can't account for: absolute, unwarranted destruction of a vital asset. The system is perfect now. It won't expect us to sabotage a core component for no tactical reason. Destroy it how? Reyes asked, her eyes searching his face, looking for the man she knew. Vance lifted his service pistol and handed it to her, but first. You need to take this key, he said, his voice flat with forced control. And you need to shoot me. Reyes' breath hitched. What? No. Elias, that's insane. I won't. I need you to shoot me in the leg, Reyes, Vance interrupted, his voice dropping to a desperate whisper. The key to the final shift is not my death, but the introduction of a new, deliberate imperfection into the perfection. If you shoot me, you commit the ultimate betrayal of police protocol and trust. You destroy the partnership, the structure, and you break the final geometry lock. He lifted his pant leg, exposing the calf of his left leg. If the shot is deliberate, the geometry will register the betrayal. It will see the flaw introduced by the stable structure. You, and the vault door will open. It's the only way to breach the perfection. Reyes' face was a mask of conflict. She held the pistol, the weight heavy and wrong. I can't do this, Elias. It's a risk we can't take. You have to, Vance pleaded, pushing the red key into her other hand. Look at me, Lena. I'm already dissolving. I have no reflection. If you don't break the geometry with betrayal, the perfection takes hold, and the shift consumes the whole town. This is the iterative solution. The final geometry demands the destruction of the structure to save itself. Reyes looked from the flawless vault door to the tiny bloody fifth card, and then back to Vance, her eyes filling with tears. She saw the desperation, the absolute conviction that this was the only way to save Blackwood Falls. The true horror wasn't the monster, it was the impossible choice. She raised the pistol, her hand shaking violently. "I am so sorry, Elias," she choked out. The gunshot was deafening in the tunnel, followed by a raw, guttural cry of pain from Vance that he fell against the wall, his left leg immediately useless, bright, arterial blood spreading rapidly across the sterile concrete floor. Reyes stared, horrified, the pistol falling from her numb fingers. She had done it. The effect was instantaneous and profound. The vault door didn't just slide open, it unzipped. The flawless circle of steel split in two, not along a hinge but along a single, jagged, lightning-like vertical line, revealing the chamber beyond. The final flaw was registered. The betrayal was complete. The inner chamber was dark, the servers gone. The space was utterly empty, save for a single item placed on a perfectly polished concrete pedestal in the center. It was a large, dense cube of pure, shimmering obsidian, the source material of the keys. And resting on top of the cube was a small, perfectly dry, leather-bound book. Dr. Finch's original journal. Vance, dragging himself forward, ignored the searing pain in his leg. "The final dispatch," he gasped, crawling toward the pedestal. "The truth." He reached the pedestal and forced himself up. He opened the journal to the last page. It was written not in cipher but in Finch's elegant, desperate English handwriting. "They lied to Elias. The military lit." The OD project was not for retrieval. It was for containment. The shift is the only thing that keeps the void pressure from equalizing with our reality. The geometry must be unstable. Elias's betrayal was meant to introduce the necessary imperfection. Now that the geometry is perfect, the containment fails. The Blackwood quarry was the lock. The police station was the key. Now the town becomes the new containment field. The shift is already complete. The final realization hit Vance with the force of the void itself. He hadn't stopped the shift. He had completed it. The perfection of the geometry, sealed by his betrayal, meant that the Nexus wasn't consuming the town, it was making the entire town the new, final, geometrically perfect structure for the containment of the void pressure. That he looked back at Reyes, who was staring in terror at the open chamber. "Lena," Vance said, his voice broken. "We didn't save the town. We just sealed us inside the cage." This marks the end of the narrative's climax. The silence that followed Vance's final, chilling realization was the deepest sound Reyes had ever heard. It wasn't the absence of noise, it was the active negation of all external sound, confirming that they were now isolated within a sealed volume. Reyes rushed to Vance, tearing cloth from her uniform to bind his wound. "Elias, what do we do? If the town is a containment field, what does that mean?" Vance, pale and fighting the pain, pointed to the large obsidian cube on the pedestal, the true core of the Nexus. "It means the geometry isn't tearing apart, it's holding. The iterative breach, the perfection, forced the void pressure to equalize. Blackwood Falls isn't on the map anymore, Reyes. It's a closed system, a geometric prison." He looked at Dr. Finch's final words again. Finch wasn't trying to open a door. He was trying to build a reliable lock. And the military, the people I worked for, they wanted to weaponize the instability, not contain it. Reyes ran out of the sublevel tunnel and into the deserted bullpen. She looked through the front window onto the main street. The sight was surreal. The streetlights glowed, the rain was gone, but the town was suspended in a state of eternal twilight. No wind blew, no trash rustled, and the air had a metallic, cold taste. The geometric perfection was complete. Every shadow was precise, every line was straight, and everything was utterly still. She tried the radio. Nothing but dead air. She tried her cell phone. The screen was black, not from lack of power, but from lack of a signal, or perhaps lack of the world outside to connect to. She was trapped in a perfect, unchanging bubble of geometry. When she returned, Vance was leaning heavily on the pedestal, his eyes fixed on the black obsidian cube. The cube is the new lock, Vance explained weakly. It's the heart of the sealed geometry. We can't destroy it without collapsing the containment, which would probably rip us and the town apart. We have to maintain the stability. Reyes looked down at the floor, where the blood from Vance's self-inflicted wound was beginning to dry. The blood hadn't soaked into the perfect concrete. Instead, it had beaded up and was flowing in tiny, perfect, self-contained streams that followed the faint, invisible lines of the Nexus's floor plan. The flaw, Reyes whispered. Your blood. Your betrayal. It's the only unstable element left in the whole system. Vance nodded. The new geometric imperative is to maintain the purity of the containment. And the only way to maintain the purity is to eliminate the source of the persistent flaw, the memory of the betrayal. The truth was laid bare. The system would not allow them to live in its perfect geometry with the knowledge of its creation. Over the next few weeks, the reality of the Blackwood containment settled into a horrifying routine. They sealed the sub-level tunnel. They survived by scavenging non-perishables from the deserted shops. They never saw another person. The other residents were either consumed by the initial shifts or were sealed into a perfect, unconscious stasis in their homes. The two detectives became the maintenance crew of their own prison. Vance's wounds slowly healed, but the symptoms of the void pressure grew worse. He became increasingly lucid about his past, remembering everything. The military handshake, the money, the exact calculations for the 10-degree lean. He was a living archive of the geometry's flaws. Reyes, meanwhile, began to forget that IT started subtly. She forgot the name of the officer who drove the black van. Then she forgot the sequence of the first obsidian card. The perfect, stable geometry was gently smoothing out the imperfections of her mind. One evening, Reyes looked at Vance, his face etched with knowledge and pain, and asked, "Detective, why did you shoot yourself in the leg? Was it a training exercise?" Vance felt a profound, aching loss. He knew his sacrifice was working. The geometry was erasing the memory of the flaw, purifying the structure around them. Reyes was reverting to the stable, ideal cop. The system preferred. He didn't answer. He simply handed her the lead-lined box containing the inert keys. "Officer Reyes," Vance said, his voice slow and heavy, "your duty is to maintain stability. Never open this box. Never tell anyone what is inside. And always keep the police station clean. It's the highest form of containment protocol." She took the box, her eyes clear and unclouded by fear or doubt. Merely professional compliance. "Yes, detective. Containment protocol." Vance watched her walk away, his heart breaking. The flaw of memory was gone from her. He, however, remained the ultimate flaw. The orchestrator, the memory keeper. A year later, an aerial search team, part of a highly specialized Black Ops surveillance program, flew over the coordinates of Blackwood Falls. Through the distorted optical grid of the void containment field, the pilot saw the town below. It was perfectly preserved, every line clean,